The next thing that I'd like to talk about in our series is police misconduct, and how the actions of different police officers can result intentionally or inadvertently with evidence being provided used against someone that can result in their conviction.
Right. I mean, it's a huge problem, and like you said, I mean, it can happen because of police officers that are just bad or dirty cops, and it does happen, and it's unfortunate, but it does. Or it can just happen because of police officers making mistakes in the way that they're conducting the investigation. So the first thing I can think about is the informant problem. So I think informants are a huge part nowadays of law enforcement techniques. Informants are used to build cases and ultimately to develop evidence against people, but a lot can go wrong in that process.
It certainly can, and there can be a variety of different ways it can go wrong. So you have instances where a person is just an unreliable informant, that they're just providing information in order to get whatever the government is offering them, whether it's leniency or money that they're going to then use to buy drugs or whatever it is, and they're just someone that you just shouldn't trust. But it can also be something that's far worse. I was involved in a series of cases where a police officer testified that he had observed certain things occur, and it was later found out that he hadn't observed really anything. He was just getting a call from a person that he used as an informant, who was saying certain evidence was going to be found in a certain location. And it turned out that that informant was planting the evidence and using it in order to get people, his rival drug dealers, to have them charged and ultimately convicted with crimes. And if it wasn't for a really in-depth analysis as to the huge breadth of this misconduct, there would be people still in jail.
Right. I mean, the risk of abuse and mistakes is really high when using informants, just because they have such an incredible incentive to give the police what they want. And sometimes, in the example that you're describing, an example to do so to advance their own criminal ends. And police are in bed with these individuals and using them, or maybe even sometimes making them up. I mean, we've all heard about the cases where a police officer made up an informant in order to get search warrants into people's homes that he wanted to search. So what he would do is he would say, I have an informant, register number 12345, who says that at 12 Main Street there's a stash of drugs. That informant was made up. It was the cop who just wanted to go and search those premises, and assuming that nobody's going to check up on him, he said that he had an informant making those, providing him with those tips. It all turned out to be false. So sometimes the informant can be made up. Sometimes the informant is put under tremendous pressure. He was just caught in a big drug bust, and he's facing maybe years or even decades in prison, and he's given a way out. And his way out is to point the finger at somebody else. So they're in that situation. They have that Hobson's choice, and what do?
What they end up doing is cooperating, giving the police what they want, and that can result in false information getting into the hands of the government and then used against you in order to have a charge lodged against you, a trial take place, and then ultimately being found convicted on something that is just not true. Right. Not simply just that the government couldn't prove it. It's even if they had a camera on you, they wouldn't be able to prove it because it didn't happen. Right.
Through planting evidence or other tricky behavior. So another example is the pressure that's placed on informants to develop drug cases. The pressure that's placed on informants to root out crime on behalf of the police will result in them coercing or tricking other individuals to commit crimes that they wouldn't commit. And the term for that is called entrapment.
And that's, trying to use these people to say, we are looking for this target, or we're looking for this particular person. What the police are allowed to do is that if someone is likely to go sell drugs, they're allowed to buy drugs from them using an undercover officer or a confidential informant. But there are things that they have to follow. Using these informants can be really tricky, where an individual is pressured to obtain drugs from a person who otherwise wouldn't be selling drugs in order to gather this information. While that person may have in fact done the acts that they're accused of, they shouldn't be found guilty of being drug dealing just because an agent of the government set them up for it.
Right, and so it does happen relatively frequently, and it's not just that police are targeting a particular individual. They might say, go get me people that are selling cocaine, or go get me people that are selling fentanyl. So I had a situation that was really unfortunate, and it ended up in federal court, but there was an informant of Colombian descent that was sent in to identify other individuals that were cocaine traffickers. So what he did was he went to a bar, in Boston that's frequented by Colombian individuals. He struck a friendship with somebody, and over time exploited that friendship into tricking that person into, conspiring with him to take a drug delivery. And so what ended up happening is the informant caused 20 kilograms of sham drugs delivered to my client, and then he was charged with and ultimately convicted of a very serious federal drug conspiracy, all based on the informant creating a crime that would have otherwise never existed.
And in addition to just, the informant creating something that couldn't have existed, this is not just to say that the police are without fault in this case. I mean, one of the things that we're talking about here is police misconduct, and it occurs. And that can be in situations where not only that the police just lie and say something that isn't true, but they give false testimony, that they exaggerate what they did see.
Right, so we had a couple of instances of that quite recently. The last two cases that Ryan and I tried together involved police officers who got on the witness stand, and we were able to demonstrate that they made false testimony or exaggerated their testimony in really sort of astonishing ways. I mean, the power of a police officer, it develops like a hubris in them where they feel cocky and they feel that they can say whatever they want to say. And so they'll often will make claims that are just not true in order to support their theory of the case, whether or not the person is actually guilty. So like I think about that drug trial that we just did where a police officer said that he observed our client dealing drugs. What did our investigation show?
So we were able to go to the scene, look with our investigator using binoculars like the police officer said in the spot that he said that he was in. And what did we see? We saw intense and thick foliage.
Right, made it impossible.
No ability for a drug deal. Now you can't tell from this video that I'm a tall, strapping young man. And so I'm 6'4". I walked to the area where the drug deal took place. I stood there on my phone waiting for an update while the defense team was behind looking at various angles through different devices to see what it was that they could see. You know what they saw? Nothing.
Right. I mean, the reality is that had we not gone on and done that investigation, the police officer would have easily been able to convict our client instead of getting the not guilty verdict we got in under half an hour.
And one of the reasons we were able to do that is we knew that this officer was giving false statement, and it gave us the ability to challenge each and every little piece of evidence.
I mean, that just shows why you need a lawyer.
You need a lawyer. This officer was willing to say that he took photos if he thought that it was helpful, and to deny that he took photos when he realized that he was caught in a lie. I mean, this is an example of someone who is the sole piece of evidence between whether someone goes home with their family or goes to prison for a series of years, and just their casual and just flagrant ability to lie without skilled attorneys show and trap them in that lie, the result would have been very different.
Yeah, that's very true. And, I want to talk about another aspect of police misconduct, and that occurs when a police officer is facing pressure to solve a crime or to complete an investigation. What ends up happening is they end up developing tunnel vision, and what they do is they focus on everything that they think suggests that their suspect is guilty, and ignore everything else, but even worse, sometimes suppress that information.
And so recently, I was involved in a case where the prosecutor had indicated that they had 30 different witnesses that they had spoken to in order to gain information about the case, and all of the 30 witnesses had no information that was relevant. What was really important to note here is that information wasn't disclosed to the defense. And so we have an example of 30 different potential witnesses showing that the government's theory by one witness doesn't add up, that the other people weren't able to corroborate and to provide support for the government's theory of the case. So what did they do? Nothing. They didn't write a name down, they didn't write a telephone number down, they didn't document in a report that any of this occurred, they just ignored the fact that it happened. And the government, the prosecutor even knew that it had happened. And this is really a great example of the fact that even though they didn't try to get a false statement, they prevented the defense from actually learning that there was helpful information out there.
Right, I mean, 30 different people who could say that the suspect was not guilty. I mean, what is that person supposed to do in that situation? It's really scary stuff. Without having a lawyer, how could somebody fight that situation? And so it's just another example of why you really do need a good lawyer, whether or not you're innocent, and maybe especially if you're innocent. Another area where the likelihood of false convictions is really high is in the investigation of cases involving abuse of children. Obviously a terrible crime, but sometimes police and law enforcement, in their zeal to bring people to justice and to solve crime, end up making terrible mistakes. I mean, the interviews of children, it's it's extremely fraught because of the nature of the developing child mind. I mean, one only has to think back to the Felsacre case and the Emerald defendant who was running a daycare, and there was an allegation of abuse occurring in the daycare, but really what was revealed was that it was the nature of the questioning that was used in questioning very small children led into suggesting that a crime occurred when in fact none had in fact occurred. It was just in the nature of the question that was asked, resulting in conviction of a heinous crime that a person never committed.
You don't have to rely on just a big media attention headline in order to see this in your daily life. I tried a case in the fall of 2023 of a daycare provider who was accused of committing abuse on a young child. The witness in that case was a 5-year-old child who said that they had observed the daycare provider hit a 1-year-old child. An awful and really just disgusting action that the person was accused of doing. But what became clear during the course of the investigation is that child had been present when there was the suggestion that the daycare provider had caused the injury because the 1-year-old fell and hit their face on a toy.
Right.
And as a result of hearing that, kind of adopted that statement. And no better example was clear is that when I was cross-examining this child, again, not going after them and being harsh or any difficult, but asking the child clear questions, very simple, in a calm manner, was able to ask things like, have we ever met? The child said yes. Tell me about that. And the child made up a story. I'd never met this child before, never spoken or seen the child a day in my life. And the child provided this information, this detail that was completely made up because they were led in the direction that they thought I wanted them to hear. Because children can be suggested by the person who's asking them questions, and they are incredibly suggestible.
Right, subject to influence. And this is just a series of examples of the many in which police misconduct, whether it's intentional or just a result of bad police work, can result in convictions of even innocent individuals. And that's why I think that it's just a tremendous mistake to not have a lawyer representing you.